Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today for a conversation about diversity and intersectionality within LGBTQIA plus culture with Chloe O. Davis, Broadway performer and author of this amazing book, The Queen's English, the LGBTQIA plus dictionary of lingo and colloquial phrases, which is a starting point for important conversations around inclusivity, sexuality, gender expression, and identity. Today's event is made possible through the generous support of LaGuardia Community College CUNY and the New York City Council offices of Daniel Drum and speaker Corey Johnson.
So exciting. Thanks everyone for joining. So I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about Chloe before she comes on. Chloe L. Davis is a proud Black bisexual woman who works in the entertainment industry in New York. A graduate of Hampton University and Temple University, she has centered her creative platform on amplifying the narrative of Black culture and heightening the awareness of the LGBTQIA plus community. Davis works as a dancer, actor, and creative and has allowed her to travel in all 50 states and internationally, where she spent 15 years researching, writing, and creating the Queen's English. Without further ado, Chloe, take it away.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for those wonderful introductions. Again, I'm Chloe O. Davis, and I'm the author of The Queen's English, the LGBTQIA plus dictionary of lingo and colloquial phrases. This is a resource or a celebration, I should say, of the diversity of queer language, but more importantly, the diversity of human identity. I created the Queen's English first and foremost because I wanted to dive into more understanding on my own attraction and my own identity. Not to give my age away, but I am a millennial, an older millennial. And I started creating this dictionary in 2006. So if we think about 2006 and we think about 2022, we absolutely know there's a huge difference when we talk about resources that are available that fully articulate the diversity of identity, right? So in 2006, I wanted to create something that represented my identity and its intersectionality, right? So thank you so much for reading the bio. And I say that I identify as a proud Black bisexual woman, but truthfully, I identify as a proud Black bisexual, demisexual, biromantic woman, right? So all these amazing terms are used because they feel affirming. So when we talk about language in general, language is created to help articulate an experience, an identity, a belief, a value, a purpose, right? So we create language that does that. Sometimes we have language that's created because mainstream culture or those who are in power have not necessarily created language that felt affirming or celebratory. And that's something very specific in the LGBTQIA plus community. Sometimes I want to put out there, I will interchange saying LGBTQIA plus or queer. But I do want to acknowledge that I do believe in diversity and I do believe in visibility and representation. So my choice is to say LGBTQIA plus. But as we know, queer is a word that is very empowering now, particularly with our younger generation. But I wanted to dive in a little bit just to talk about the difference, right? So I also use queer, but I do want to give a historical reference behind the word queer, right? The power of language. Queer, in its original sense, just meant odd or peculiar, right? But over time, queer was used as a slur, or that was used in a derogatory way to belittle those who were gay, or before the word gay, homosexual, right? But what happened in the 1980s during the HIV and AIDS crisis, because people kept having this negative connotation around queer, what many activists, gay activists did was reclaim the word and said, okay, I'm going to take this word and I'm going to bring it, I'm going to make it mine. And so, yes, I am queer. And yes, I feel empowered by being queer. So taking a word and reclaiming it or reappropriating it and giving it positive connotation is the lineage or etymology of the word queer. And because of those gay activists and allies, deciding to do that back in the 1980s, brings us to now the 2020s, and why the younger generation has a beautiful platform to use the word queer as this identity label. And it's an all catchphrase. It can either mean that someone is non-cisgender, right? And when we say non-cisgender, it just means those who are cisgender, your identity, your gender aligns with what was assigned at birth. And when you are non-cisgender or trans, or non-binary or genderqueer, that just means that what the doctor assigned you at birth, that gender is not what aligns with how you feel about yourself, your personal journey. So when we say queer, a lot of times it can mean, identities that are non-cisgender or identities that are non-heteronormative. That word heteronormative, it just means a lot of times our society has had this makeup of being very binary or heteronormative. And that just means that genders that we are very familiar with when we talk about male, female, woman, man, and also those identities that accompany that, masculinity, femininity, and the roles that often connect with that, passive dominance, things of that nature. That's the scope of what a heteronormative society looks like. But as we're learning that when we think of heteronormativity, it does not articulate the diversity of our society. And so again, the word queer brings that notion into that it is not heteronormative, and what is normative is what is diverse. And so when I use the word queer, understanding that it is encompassing of the ideas of this, again, the spectrum of identity, identities that could be inclusive of what is binary or identities that are not, a celebration of the diversity and exploration of identities when I use the word queer. So with all that, let's just dive in and get to know a little bit more about the Queen's English and how to use it, the resource, and why it's important. And when we really talk about the intersectionality and the diversity of language. So I'm going to share my screen here. And we'll get started. So we'll skip a few slides because we had a beautiful introduction. But I want to start here. I talked about the dictionary and that, the Queen's English is a dictionary that celebrates the etymological diversity of over 800 terms used to describe our collective LGBTQIA+ experiences. And what that means in a more connective way is that language is just so powerful, right? Words are powerful. Words have the ability to truly affirm and celebrate and uplift identities, people, beliefs, society, but then also, in retrospect, words can also do harm. And what I was explaining before, wanting to create a dictionary that truly represents the spectrum of identity. And when we say what is identity, right? Our identity is not just our attraction. Our identity is not just our sexual anatomy. Our identity is not just our gender identity, right? It could be our gender expression, our romantic orientation, our relationship orientation, but it also is our race, it's our religion, it's our ethnicity, it is our beliefs, it is our values. All of these layers are put together to make us, each and every one of us, so unique. So first and foremost, I did not find resources that really dove into identity and the spectrum of identity and the celebration of identity. And particularly when I was exploring my identities, and when I was first had the notion of being bi-curious, right? And bi-curious just means that there was exploration or curiosity in wanting to explore same-sex or queer relationships, right? So I remember that a time in my life where I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm bi-curious because I'm open and I'm interested and intrigued and wanting to unfold a big part of me. I did not actually have anyone in close proximity that identified as bisexual. Nor did I have anyone in close proximity within my community, being a Black woman, that openly identified as bisexual. So I just felt alone, right? I felt alone. And sometimes I felt that my identity, or what I thought was my identity, was quite muted because I didn't have that type of representation, right? So what happened was I wanted to create a dictionary or a resource that could help me affirm my identity, right? And all of its complexity and all of its layers and beauty. So I started to do research that diving into resources, and it was more books then, and it was just honestly more conversation, going into LGBTQ spaces and just talking to individuals who openly identified as such, or mentors and things of that nature. So a lot of these terms, I want to say 60% of these terms, come from primary research, those within the community that identify as such. And so over time, I realized that it wasn't just my identity that needed more representation and needed to be more celebrated. I found that there was many identities that needed to be more represented, right, and celebrated, whether someone was non-binary, someone was trans, someone was, to be more specific, trans-masculine, trans-feminine, someone who is agender, someone who is asexual, aromantic. All of this language is used to truly identify different labels of how we feel, our attraction, and the way we feel about ourselves. And so if you look, you see the dictionary is laying on this really amazing background. And what you're actually looking at are pride flags. And this really shows the diversity of identity. We have pride flags that represent non-binary, pride flags that represent genderqueer, transgender, the bear community, the lipstick lesbian community, a romantic community. We have demigirl, we have demigender, we have omnisexual. So all of these pride flags really are emphasizing and celebrating different identities. And so what you find in the dictionary is the celebration of that identity, just broken down in the way that is understanding, just like any dictionary, right? So we're gonna move on a little bit, just like any dictionary. So this is a view of what's inside. And I was saying, just like any dictionary, you're gonna have the term, you're gonna have the part of speech, you're gonna have the definition or definitions, right? I say definitions because we have to honor that there are more than one way to identify a label or experience, right? Particularly when we talk about the queer community. Everyone's experience is not the same. I identify as bisexual, but how I identify in my experience and how I define bisexuality could be different from someone else's. And so what I wanted to do with this dictionary is to honor the many myriad of ways we experience identity. So you see here, of course, you have the term, the part of speech, the definitions. You also have a usage example, right? And so with the usage example, it just gives you more nuance how the word is used within the community. And then there is also, I like this section, it has the emoji, because, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to be a cool dictionary, but it just is a synonym, right? Want more information, think, and it gives you a quick reference of what the term is. And then a great part that I really love too, the two new components, which sometimes people are so excited. They're like, wait, is this a dictionary or is this like an encyclopedia? You know, remember those encyclopedias? But no, it is a full reference resource. And I thought it was really important that not only do we just define the term, we celebrate the term, but we also talk about its etymology or how its relationship to the community, right? So this particular Did You Know is talking about, you know, queer Asian icons and their contribution to not only the AAPI community, but also the queer community. And it's a list of different activists and comedians and congressmen of color, you know, that have made great recognition within our society. And I thought that's important because it's not just about the word, it's about the understanding and the history of the word. It's about those who are present that give liberation to the words and phrases. That's important. Again, that's the power of language, because language identifies a culture and a culture identifies people, and people identify history and also the present, but also what the future looks like. The other part that I really enjoy and I thought was really important is called the usage note. And the usage note is in red. It's like alert, alert. And what it does is basically gives, it just states where a word comes from, right? So for instance, when we look at Abigail, it says this term is commonly used in the gay male community. So throughout this dictionary, we can say that a lot of words come from the gay male community, or words come from the ballroom scene, which is predominantly Black and Latinx, trans, gay, and queer people who have been marginalized, but decided to create a community that felt safe, that felt empowering, and just really embraced artistry. So we know a little bit about the ballroom scene because of shows like Pose, because of RuPaul's Drag Race, and many other elements, but there's a lot of terminology in this dictionary and that we use actually in society and particularly in pop culture, but now in main culture, because you may hear it on MSNBC or even CNN when you hear the word shade, and when you hear the word read or throwing shade, things like that, that comes from a community that created language to supplement their self-worth. You also have a lot of language that comes from the lesbian community or the Black lesbian community. It comes from the transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming community. You have language that has originated in the aromantic or the asexual community. So there's language that represents the diversity of identity. And that's what I loved about this dictionary. And that's what I wanted to implore, is that I want to celebrate the diversity of identity, not make it focused on just the main idea or what is heteronormative or who is in power, right? Because a lot of times we see narratives, and what I found even in gay and queer resources in 2006 and beyond, I found a lot of resources that did not embody experiences that were non-white, that were non-gay, that were non-lesbian, right? So that's the thing. That's why we're celebrating over 800 terms, almost 900 terms, to really show the diversity of identity. And another big thing here, the dictionary is colorful, and that's because it needs to be vibrant, because we are a vibrant community. But even if you see here, you see female, gender fluid, demigirl, male, transgender, third gender, neutral, even neutros, right? Agender, like these are identities, whether we call them minority or not, but these are identities that need visibility, that need to be celebrated, that need to be understood, because we feel this. These are not null identities. These are identities that are truth to many people. And so instead of dismissing or ignoring, we want to celebrate and encourage more educational resources that can help us understand identity in its true scale. Because as educators, as students, and also understanding that particularly the younger generations, Gen Z and the younger generations coming, their understanding of identity and equality and social justice is on a different level. It's very inclusive, it's very powerful. And I feel like these are the conversations that need to happen and allow these younger generations to be at the forefront of these conversations, because that is who our future is, and that's who understands identity in this diverse spectrum that we speak about. So now let's jump in a little more and see another page. Pronouns, right? I know this is when we talk about affirming language, what is affirming language? Affirming language is something that feels right, that feels inclusive, that feels celebratory, that feels acknowledged, right? That's language, that's affirming language. And a way we support affirming language, or the way that we create affirming language, is about creating labels that help us feel our most authentic selves, right? So for instance, I gave myself, and another thing, when we talk about language and labels, it's only proper that that individual assigns labels for themselves, right? It is not proper or respectful for anyone else to employ labels or identities on someone, because you're not them, right? So I said I am Black, right? I said that I'm a woman. I said that I'm bisexual. I said I'm demisexual. I said I'm biromantic. So these are the terms, whenever we talk about Chloe O. Davis, that we can use, right? Because they feel empowering. They feel authentic to me in my personal experience. And also in my title name, I have she, her, right? So these pronouns, she, her, hers, those are pronouns that feel affirming to how I express my identity at this moment in time. And the other thing we need to understand is that someone's identity and exploration of identity can change, can be fluid, can be flexible, and that is proper, that's okay, and it should be valid. The one thing I do want to get into about pronouns, right? Names and pronouns. That's important because it's affirming language, right? And here it says, pronouns are personal identifiers that validate and support a person's gender expression, right? The pronouns listed below are singular pronouns. That's right. So we see a list of pronouns, and this list is not conclusive. There are so many more pronouns that are being used to identify people, right? But as we see, it's not just those binaries, he, she, right? And it's not just they either, which I want to say in 2019 was the most popular word of the year, which I thought was amazing. But there's a lot more. Z, E, Zim, air, there's so many, and they're going to continue to grow because, again, gender identity is always going to be a constant evolution, and more affirming words and pronouns will be created to make sure that we are affirming communities and identities. And sorry about that loud noise. We're in New York. It happens, right? But I think what's important is about respecting pronouns and also respecting chosen names, right? What do we say about a chosen name? Okay, so sometimes you have a given name, right? And a given name is something that was assigned to us at birth. But then you have a chosen name, and that's a name that is used because that name feels more affirming to how that person identifies. Right. And so a lot of times there may be times where particularly those who identify as trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, genderqueer, gender fluid may not only just use pronouns to help validate and support their gender identity, but also use a chosen name. And again, I think it's very important that we honor, chosen names and pronouns of someone's experience. And another thing about pronouns, I've been asked this a lot, how do you ask someone their pronouns? Well, first we can be proactive, right? And we can just give ours, right? So in an introduction, I can say, hi, my name is Chloe Davis. I use she, her pronouns. I love to write. I love to perform. How about you? Just to be personable with someone. And I feel like that's the beautiful thing that I wanted to happen with this dictionary in general, is not only is it giving us educational resources as what language is being used within the LGBTQIA+ community, but also what are tools to help us have larger conversations around language, inclusivity, intersectionality, and larger conversations and inclusive conversations with those who may not look like us, right? Like, when are we ever in a space where we can connect and where we can connect with, you may be Christian, you connect with someone who's Muslim, or, you may be straight, but you connect with someone who's trans. It's about understanding humanity, looking at each other as humanity, and not looking at our differences, but looking at our similarities, celebrating our differences and learning from each other. And I think that's a big lesson right now with pronouns, is that I think we all have to open up and kind of deconstruct what society has employed for such a long time, right? This heteronormative idea, we have to kind of deconstruct those ideas and open ourselves up to learn about the evolution of identity, the evolution of gender identity and gender expression. I'm going to keep going here. So here are some more terms. We've dived a lot into gender identity, and we talked about, of course, the flags, the pride flags. You see the pride flag for gender flux, you see the pride flag for gender fluid, and to understand that there is differences, there is a difference with these terms, and again, just to respect those differences, because everyone experiences identity differently. And I think that's the beautiful thing, is that we understand that each person is very unique, and their experience with their inner self and external self is different. And we just want to learn as a society how to respect that. And we can do it through language. That's one of the main ways that we can do it through. How do we continue to enforce affirming language And how do we continue and enforce inclusive language, right? And inclusivity does not necessarily mean lumping things together and forgetting about others, right? Inclusivity means, again, making people feel affirmed, seen, and celebrated. So for instance, before I change the page, inclusive, right? So I remember I said, saying LGBTQI plus, right? That's a way for me trying to be inclusive. And I remember someone asking me, well, it's so long, can't you just shorten it? I'm like, yeah, we could shorten it, but why? Because then I'm going to dismiss someone's identity. And even with saying LGBTQI plus, I'm still dismissing identities. I'm still dismissing those who are trigender. I'm still dismissing those who are bigender. I'm still dismissing those who are pansexual or pangender, polysexual. You know what I mean? So it's about, when we are inclusive, we want to still make sure that people are represented, and being inclusive just truly means checking in to say, hey, is this a space, a safe space where people feel valued, seen, heard, and respected? So I dived into this slide because I love to talk about the history again of like queer language. And I'm really proud to learn more about the Harlem Renaissance. As an entertainer, as an artist, a dancer, singer, actress, you know, I fell in love with and a writer, I fell in love with the Harlem Renaissance a long time ago. But I fell in love again because there were some of my idols, I realized that they were just like me, right? I feel so honored to stand on the shoulders of Josephine Baker, who also identified as bisexual. I feel honored to stand on the shoulders of like Sid Hughes and Ma Rainey and Zora Neale Hurston and Alan Locke. And I just thought this was phenomenal, because a lot of times when history is told, it's not told in its fullest, most authentic way. So it's really great to learn more about the Harlem Renaissance, not just being a space that was so liberating for Black people and Black artists and Black writers, performers, musicians, but also being a space that was so liberating to honor the diversity of human identity and to honor those who were Black and queer, right? And to also understand there was language that was created way back in the 1920s that's still being used now. For instance, in the closet, is one of the words that came from the Harlem Renaissance, and that is still being used now, and it has sometimes a shortened to closeted. And the life, that's a word that's still used today, and particularly it was really celebrated when Studio 54 was in full swing. That was where people went to be in the life. And even words like nookie, reefa, scram, you know, these words were created during the Harlem Renaissance. And I think it's just so great that we also get to celebrate that. And we also get to state that these words are over a century old and still have vibrance in life. And also to be able to honor and credit the community that created them, to credit, you know, a Black community, a Black queer community, during a time where marginalization and racism and prejudice was so heavily seen, and as we still see it now, but just to be able to honor the language and culture of a community that has been marginalized. And I think that's the big thing about this dictionary, and the big thing about the power of LGBTQI plus language is that this is a community that has been marginalized, that deals with transphobia and homophobia, racism, xenophobia, you know, xenophobia. Like, we deal with so much hurt and pain and challenges, but yet we're still resistant. And we still push to make the world a better place. We still push to change people's ideas, so that way our younger generation, their narratives will be different, or be more inclusive, more affirming. So that's another thing about the dictionary, is to not just celebrate language, but also to celebrate those communities that contributed this language in a way that is right. And so that we get away from appropriation, and we truly embody appreciation, because there is a difference between appropriation and appreciation. Appropriation is just taking it and not giving credit to where its credit's due, whether that be style, language, you know, and also appropriation causes something called erasure, right? Erasing someone's narrative, erasing someone's history, and recreating in a way that is not right, that's not correct. But then there is appreciation, right? And Appreciation is very different, because when you're appreciating it, you are crediting those that have made the contribution, and you are appreciating that, and you are sharing the knowledge of those that have contributed, and sharing all of the aspect of what has been contributed. And that's appreciation, celebrating someone's contribution and doing it in a way that is empowering, enlightening, and uplifting. So another community that I wanted to dive into when we talk about diversity of language is the leather community. So I talked a little bit about the ballroom scene, which is, was actually created right here in New York City, and kind of the birth child of the Harlem Renaissance. And what we know today of the ballroom scene, we know about balls, we know about Vogue, we know about words like real, shade, over, come through, these words like that. But we also know that it was it was birthed from majority Black and also Latinx, gay, trans, and queer people who needed a safe space to truly feel affirmed in their identities, right? So if we go to the other coast, particularly San Francisco, then you had kind of and also Chicago, but like port cities, like even New York, San Francisco, even Chicago, you had the birth of the leather scene, right? The leather community. And the leather community was a community that embraced masculinity, but also gayness or queerness, right? But in a way that felt righteous and that also liberating, and it also embraced sexual liberation, right? So when you have words like dom and submissive and leather daddy or dominatrix, like this comes from the leather community, the BDSM community. And that's something we don't talk about a lot too, is that, identity is part of our attraction too, is part of our relationship identity, is part of our role playing. And the leather community embraces that, embraces the power of role playing, the power of relationship dynamics, and the liberation and sexual liberation. So that is when language was birthed. That is the mindset of the leather community in creating language that felt authentic to their experiences. So I know there's probably lots of questions here, but I do want to say that language is constantly evolving, and it will constantly evolve because what does language do? It affirms, right? And if we need language to affirm us, we will constantly create language to affirm us, right? And at times too, language may come around to hinder people or dismiss people's ways of life or identity, right? So that's why I say it's the power of language. We have the power to make it forthright and feel right and inclusive. And then we also have the power to do the opposite. So that's our choice. But what has happened within the LGBTQIA plus community, language continues to be used to, I say this all the time, to affirm, but language continues to be used to talk about equality, whether it be racial equality, social equality. We understand what's happening now with our young trans and non-binary youth, right? What's happening in Florida, what's happening in Alabama, what's happening in Texas, right? About rights. So the LGBTQI plus community is a community that will always continue to persist and push through any type of oppression, marginalization, or injustice. And we use our stance and we use our language to do so. So it's a very vast history with language. And unfortunately, I know we can't do it in a 40-minute presentation. But what I can leave is that I encourage all of us to open our minds, hearts, and eyes to understand the diversity of identity and what that looks like. That means diverse experiences, that means diverse skin tones, that means diverse language coming out of our mouths, that means diverse abilities or disabilities. I think once we put ourselves in a mindset and notion of understanding that everyone's experience is different, but everyone's experience is just, and if we are open and more compassionate about honoring our differences and celebrating our similarities, I think we can move society and humanity to a place that's more inclusive and more safe for all of us. So I'm going to open it up for questions. yes, I actually did. So that's a beautiful thing about the book and this experience, is that primary resource was my focus. It was really great because I was always led to groups, communities, and people that could help with that type of research, right? So whether I talk to a particular lesbian, but then saying, hey, how about we go to the archives, or if I'm going to the GLBT Museum in San Francisco, to dive into these this research, to go to the Schomburg Center in Harlem to dive into more things that surround Black queer identity, so yes, I dived into as many archives and centers as possible to compile this dictionary. And of course, there's so many more. I'm actually in the space of creating a version for young readers. I'm doing that again. And I feel like, again, this is only like a slithering of words and research that's possible because it's just me. But I do hope that we continue to hone in and honor the celebration of culture and honor the individuality of different communities, right? And I have to be honest, sometimes it was difficult, right? Because there are so many different experiences, and you never want anyone to feel like their experience isn't valued enough. So it was really the idea of listening to the experiences and finding like that common denominator, you know what I mean? Because that's the thing. I feel like it's a dictionary, right? Then it's lucrative and it's just, and I'm like, yes, it is, but we can't put it in a box. And I think that's what we have to understand with our community. We are not a community we put it in a box. Yes, we want things to be Black and white because we want understanding. That's why we have labels, because we just want to quickly label something so we can comprehend what's happening. But that's the beauty of our community, is that we want to kind of erase that in a way where it's not about putting something in the box. It's just about understanding its existence, but that existence is fluid. And so that's what I tried to do with the dictionary. I just wanted to say, for those listening, ace, I spoke a little bit about that, asexual, aromantic, again, language, right? So here's the thing. I feel history is important, and I feel like it's not, again, I'm so careful about erasure. I think it's more so about the etymology of words and the evolution of words versus dismissing something old because something new has arrived. So that's what I did with the dictionary, and I will continue to do with the versions, because we can't dismiss language that was here prior to us. And then we cannot ignore language that is evolving after us. So I feel like maybe using the platform of the Queen's English allows that type of ongoing historic past, present, future resource, that I want to always keep at hand, because I do get really nervous about erasure, I think it's just that we understand words that came in the 1920s and before. And I think it's also just that we understand the difference of those who feel some way about queer and those who feel other way about queer. And I think it's important that we understand when, even other words that have been reappropriated, like dyke and sissy and faggot, right? But then I also think it's really important that we understand the evolution of pronouns, and we understand, more identities that are being more to the forefront because we have language around it, right? Before we didn't have language, you felt a way, like, hey, I feel this way, I don't have language, but now we have language for a lot of things. And I think with social media, that's a way, I'm not saying we use it and we don't use it, we do, we embrace what it is, because that is the tool of now, that is how we start these conversations, right? Because it is all about having more conversations around the spectrum of identity, having more open, transparent conversations. Sometimes conversations may not be led the best way, okay, and sometimes they are. Sometimes conversations aren't as inclusive, and sometimes they are. but we're having conversations, and that's something we were not doing before, right? So that's the other thing about resources. It's like, you know, younger, even we have resources to say, hey, let me go on social media and see what the conversation's about, or queer Tumblr, let me figure out how other people are identifying as, you know, asexual, aromantic. So I don't feel like it's a disservice. I feel like it is a service. I just feel like there has to be, not necessarily continuity, there just needs to be understanding that we cannot erase one idea to supplement another. I think it's important. I mean, for instance, I have the word hermaphrodite in the dictionary. Absolutely, that is not the word we use. It's intersex. However, it is in there, and it's strictly stated that this is a dated term. But that was a term that was used when we did not have the knowledge and understanding of what intersex identity is, right? So it's one of those things, or tranny, you know what I mean? Like, many people, that's like, they can say that this word is derogatory. However, there are some people who still identify as a tranny or transsexual, and that is how they feel good about identifying. Maybe they're older, but that feels affirming to them. It's not about erasing that, but it is about mentioning that that was used then. Some people may feel like this is derogatory or even pejorative to say now, and so I say that, right? But it doesn't mean that we just dismiss it, you know, because sometimes we do a disservice by dismissing information because we don't learn from it again. You know, they always say history repeats itself. So that's what I would say about it. And just for everyone else listening, you know, these are the types of conversations that are happening more and more, that we may have not been privy to because we are a bit older. But it is important. And also to understand, I said it before, where everyone labels themselves, right? And how you label yourself is what feels affirming. It can change and it cannot, but what we don't want to do is dismiss, you know, someone's, you know, how they identify, you know what I mean? Because it shouldn't be dismissive. If someone's bisexual, they're bisexual. If someone's pansexual, they're pansexual. It's not that one should be featured more than the other. It's just how that person identifies. Yeah. Yes, I actually, in my children's version, I have spreads. So I showed you the spread on the Harlem Renaissance, but and I showed you a half spread on the pronouns, but there's spreads on tucking and binding, there's spreads on the genderbread person coming out, things like that, on queer family dynamic. But I'm going to introduce and even hate crimes, but I'm going to introduce a new spread. And this spread, I haven't named it yet, but it's about being in touch with your true feelings. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the pressures, and also when we feel uneasy, you know what I mean? I feel like it's just more of those conversations that need to happen about feeling uneasy, and how do we reach out to a trusted person or be part of a safe space. Well, this has been a great conversation. Definitely, I appreciate being able to present, but I also, again, love the conversation. I think that's most important. It's about just having, I always like to say, a safe space where we can talk about identity, the effects of identity, the exploration of identity, the evolution of identity. I think that's really important. And to be able to do it in not only an academic setting or educational setting, but also in a more public setting, right? To encourage these types of DEI conversations, because we have to shift the culture so that way we can be more inclusive, and also be educated on what is truly happening in today's society. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today for this very important conversation. We're excited to offer all of you a copy of the Queen's English, signed by Chloe. So it's to help support you with the work you're doing with the LGBTQIA+ community. So just email Ira and I, and we will arrange a time to drop it off, or if you want to stop by and pick it up from us. We'll also have a copy on reserve in the library if you want to recommend it as a resource to someone else too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.